Hello, and welcome to People of the Pod, brought to you by American Jewish Committee. Each week, we take you beyond the headlines to help you understand what they all mean for America, Israel, and the Jewish people. I'm your host, Manya Brashear-Pashman. The Negev, the vast desert region that covers 60% of Israel's territory, is home to only 10% of its population. It's also home to Ben-Gurion University and many of the communities attacked by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. Doug Seserman is the CEO of Americans for Ben-Gurion University. In that role, he has worked to highlight the innovations and technology know-how that Israel can offer America and the world when it comes to sustainability, water conservation, energy solutions, and ecology. But since October 7th, BGU's efforts have shifted from sustaining lives across Israel's south to rebuilding them. Doug Seserman is with us now to discuss those efforts. Doug, welcome to People of the Pod.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So, compared to other Israeli universities, the BGU community was disproportionately impacted by the October 7th massacre, correct? I mean, can you give our listeners some perspective on the scope of loss?
Sure. So, as the crow flies, our main campus in Beersheba is only about 22 miles from Gaza. We had a number of students at the Nova Music Festival site, and a number of our employees and their families live in the Western Negev or Gaza envelope area. So as a university today, we have 111 dead. That includes those murdered on October 7th, as well as fallen soldiers. We've had close to 6,600 of our students, faculty, employees, administration called up to Miluim, reserve duty, and not all of them have come back. Some 2,000 are still fighting. So there was a direct and disproportional impact. Now, everybody in Israel has experienced this war. Every family knows somebody, but for us, it's definitely disproportional. Literally every colleague's kids are fighting. Every younger woman who's a colleague in her 30s, their husbands are fighting. People are on their WhatsApp just trying to hear what's going to happen next. It's a very surreal situation.
4 hostages were rescued by the IDF earlier this month. Were there any faculty, staff, or students from Ben-Gurion taken hostage?
Noa Argamani, you may recall her name. She was at the music festival and forcibly separated from her boyfriend, Avinatan Or, who's a BGU alum. But Noah is a 26-year-old information systems student of ours.
Yes, thank you. Of course, Noah was one of those hostages recently rescued. We are so thankful that Noah is now home. 124 hostages are still being held in Gaza. We are praying and advocating for their safe return home. And we will highlight those that are part of the BGU family. Sasha Trufanov, Avinatan Or, Alex Danzig, and Segev Kalfon. And Doug, how many at BGU were called up for reserve duty?
That's about a third of the student body. Classes, obviously, they were supposed to start on October 15th, and they didn't resume until December 31st. The president of the university, Professor Daniel Shamovitz, did his best to have no student be left behind, but at some point we had to resume classes. And so today, when you go to the campus, I don't want to say it's thriving, but it's functioning. There's a normalcy about life in Israel and also on campus, but there's nothing normal about this new normal. Many of our reservists are back and they're in the classroom, but even going from being in Gaza in conflict to then studying for a test, writing papers and things, people are traumatized, and the university's done an amazing job providing psychological support and counseling for the students and the faculty and the families who've been directly impacted. But still, it's a very difficult situation.
In addition to those called up for reserve duty immediately after October 7th, was there a sizable volunteer effort, or was the community just too shell-shocked?
Thank you for asking. Today, when you go to campus, it's happening and it's alive and doing as well as it can. On October 7th, it immediately pivoted from a university that was had to close because of the war, to almost a hub for activity to support not only the faculty and students, but also the community, a logistics center, if you will. We were housing in our dorms evacuated families and also medical professionals from the center of the country that needed to help Soroka, which is the main hospital of the Negev and also the teaching hospital for our two medical schools. Very close relationship with Soroka Medical Center. Our medical students immediately became ER triage doctors. They learned by doing. If you talk with some of them today, they'll tell you in a strange way that October 7th may have really accelerated their knowledge in terms of their career, et cetera. And then we just started doing what we could. Students mobilized as Israelis do to create care packages and provide clothing and anything that was necessary for these evacuated families. We had, I want to say, close to 1,500 members of our community that were evacuated.
I imagine it's even more than medical students getting this, on the ground experience. I happened to be in journalism school in New York when 9/11 happened. I remember places in New York City all of a sudden transforming into emergency centers like what you're describing. And I think a lot of my classmates got a crash course, right, in journalism from covering that.
Absolutely. Even our social work and psychology students became kind of caseworkers. I mean, everybody was doing what they could. And in a way, we should feel really good about it. It's hard to say there are silver linings from October 7th, but the resilience that the country has demonstrated, and the university in particular, is incredible and quite inspiring. One thing about Ben-Gurion University that's unique is, yes, we are an educational and research institution and one of the leading universities in Israel, and we're quite proud of those accomplishments. But we have a particular and very unique mandate to develop the Negev region. And it's almost in what we call the Ben-Gurion DNA to activate the social justice aspect of being a Jew, honestly. But it's particularly manifest at the university, and we're proud of it.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that kind of that innovative spirit that I hear a lot about that characterizes Israel and obviously BGU. And I mentioned earlier how BGU has introduced, all of these technologies, innovative solutions for environmental concerns. I think David Ben-Gurion said, making the desert bloom. That was his goal and what the university aims for. But has the aftermath of October 7th highlighted other faculty, other fields? You talked about psychology and social work. Can you talk a little bit about how this kind of innovative spirit has been applied and has really shown itself since October 7th?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. And it's important to note also that Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, it was important on October 6th. When you visit the Beersheba campus, it's in a way, it's Startup Nation on steroids. You have Ben-Gurion University and Soroka Hospital, the Advanced Technology Park that has 3,000 employees and 70 multinational companies right across the high-speed train station to get you to Tel Aviv in just over an hour. And you have the IDF moving south and their IT and computing base literally adjacent to the university. It's an amazing place. I actually feel like a lot of people visit Israel and they don't really go south. And the truth is, you haven't seen the future of Israel until you spend time in the Negev, and you don't really understand the Negev until you spend time at the university. But in terms of areas that the university excels at that are important in the aftermath, I mean, it's everything. But some of the things I would highlight is our strength in engineering, computer sciences, IT, cybersecurity. The cyber capital of Israel is actually Beersheba. This IDF base that's adjacent to us, I call them 22nd century defense systems, remote sensing, satellite defense technology. Seserman Air Force Base is in the Negev. That's where all members of the Israeli Air Force get their wings, but they actually get their degree, their educational degree, from Ben-Gurion University. So when we think about the future, listen, it takes a village, and you can never do wrong by doing right. So I'd encourage your listeners to just get involved in something in Israel that's consistent with their values.
I know the South has supplied much of Israel's kind of homegrown food, vegetable crops, barley, wheat, dairy. But obviously, I mean, many of the Palestinian and Thai workers who tended those fields, they're not returning anytime soon. Neither are the residents of those kibbutzim. Has BGU played a role in filling that gap?
The answer is yes, and doing our best and not enough. And very proud of all the volunteerism that you're seeing, especially also from the diaspora coming to Israel to help pick fruit and et cetera. We had faculty that basically stopped because they weren't teaching and they had time. They just started going into the fields and helping the farmers, both with their hands and their heart. At the end of the day, there's a very close relationship, and literally hundreds of our students and faculty and administration has been involved in volunteer efforts. At the end of our Board of Governors meeting last week, we had a whole afternoon dedicated for volunteers who came from around the world to volunteer as well.
I want to go back to campus real quick and talk a little bit more about the students. I know that BGU has a really robust diversity and inclusion effort that covers Druze, other Arabs, women, disabilities, Ethiopian immigrants, ultra-Orthodox Jews. It's a very diverse campus. And I'm curious how this diverse student population views the scenes from some American university campuses. I mean, has there been vigorous debate on BGU's campus about how Israel is fighting this war? And does it look any different?
Now, that's a big question. I can say this, we're extremely proud of the diversity on campus and sometimes what we call a shared society. We have Professor Saraba Bou-Rabia, who's the Vice President of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion in Israel. That DEI term has become controversial in the United States, but in Israel, in our campus, it's a thriving concept. We have approximately 20,000 students. Most of them are Israeli. We have about 1,000 international students that study in English, mostly from China and India, but also from North America. And then we have about 2,000 Arab Israelis. So of the Arab Israeli, a number of them are Bedouin. We're by far the largest university for Bedouin students in Israel. So we have robust discussions underneath that framework of the VP of Diversity to try to bring students together. Sometimes there have been, before October 7th, protests, peaceful protests with Arab students protesting and Jewish students also there. And we've never had issues. There's a way to have civil discourse, and free speech and academic freedom is critical. I mean, it's a hallmark to a just society. So, you have to be able to have peaceful protests. Now, going back to what's happening on American campuses, I'm personally embarrassed. I wrote an op-ed recently in the Times of Israel about what do you do when your alma mater no longer reflects your values. I'm a proud Wildcat from Northwestern University, and we had a terrible situation on campus. And then our president, Michael Schill, who's a smart guy and also a Jew, negotiated with the encampment leaders and created a precedent, almost like it's not negotiating with terrorists, but it's compromising and rewarding, enabling bad behavior and creating a precedent that the way to make change is to be lawless and create hate speech. So something's happened in the U.S. on college campuses that's absolutely out of control. But at the same time, freedom of speech, especially in academic institutions, must be protected, but it has to be safe. We teach chemistry on university campuses all across the country. Perhaps we should be teaching morality, and maybe that should be a required course. Now, I don't even know what that looks like, but I think people have lost a sense for the difference between proper behavior and improper behavior, and they sometimes use free speech to do hateful and wrongful things, and that's not appropriate.
In other words, you're suggesting social chemistry lessons. How do we get along? How do relationships work?
I love that. I think what's happened is we all are talking in echo chambers. We've no longer figured out how to understand the narrative of the other and how to find some sort of central place to move forward where people can agree to disagree, but you can move forward in some kind of democratic and civil way.
So I don't want to lose sight of the fact that you head Americans for BGU, right? The arm of the university that and works to garner American support. Has October 7th presented some unexpected challenges in that realm?
The answer to that is yes, and also, unfortunately, opportunities at the same time. There's been an I call it October 8th awakening. Some people are calling it October 8th Jews. People in this country and in the diaspora are waking up that something is happening out there with anti-Semitism and the relationship between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And as an American diaspora Jew, you have sort of like three options. You can do nothing and no miracles are going to come from that. Or you can kind of wait and see and no miracles are going to come from that. Or you can kind of double down your efforts and get involved with institutions that matter, can make a difference. And that's what we're encouraging.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining us and for giving us a kind of a snapshot of what people are trying to do to rebuild Israel's South and help it recover after October 7th. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by AJC. Our producer is Atara Lakritz. Our sound engineer is TK Broderick. You can subscribe to People of the Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or learn more at ajc.org/peopleofthepod. The views and opinions of our guests don't necessarily reflect the positions of AJC. We'd love to hear your views and opinions or your questions. You can reach us at peopleofthepod@ajc.org. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tell your friends, tag us on social media with #PeopleOfThePod, and hop on to Apple Podcasts to rate us and write a review to help more listeners find us. Tune in next week for another episode of People of the Pod.